This match is what defines King of the Ring 1998, and in a lot of ways, it defines Mick Foley's career. The Hell in the Cell match. This was only the second one I believe they had done. Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker had an amazing debut Hell in the Cell match back in October of the previous year. And when I saw that match, I didn't think anything could top that. And Mick Foley has told the story many times. I mean, it's been 20 years. Mick Foley's been telling stories about this since the day it happened. I remember one of those early WWF home video VHS tape releases. Mick Foley had one. It might have been the Three Faces of Foley. All I know is I have like 5 copies of the fucking thing. But I remember the entire video was him telling stories to a very young Matt and Jeff Hardy, who were just sitting there listening to Mick tell stories about his career and taking a look back at some of these crazy matches. But he's told the story a million times that he was terrified that the match was going to be a stinker because The Undertaker was also injured during this time. He had a really bad ankle and he had a noticeable limp. You could see him, when he was walking around out there, he could barely walk on the damn thing. So Mick Foley basically thought if they have any chance to make this match good, they have to do something extreme. And he talked about how he was having a conversation with Terry Funk and he had the idea of maybe starting the match on top of the cage. He's told the story a million times. So lo and behold, the match starts. Mick Foley, or Mankind, comes out first and he immediately climbs right up to the top of the cage. The Undertaker makes his entrance next and he climbs up there to join him. And they start fighting on top of the cage. And this isn't like the way the Hell in the Cell is now. The Hell in the Cell now in modern times is extremely well built. It looks sturdy, it looks solid, it's even a lot taller, and it's just constructed a completely different way. Back in these early days of Hell in the Cell, this thing looks sketch as fuck. I mean, they're up there. I mean, these two guys weigh 300 pounds each, and they're stepping on this mesh cage, and it's sagging so far down that I can't believe the cage didn't break. I'm sure it was reinforced and I'm sure it was safe, but when you watch those guys walk on it, I mean, I would be up there terrified. I'm already scared of heights as it is. So they're up there brawling a little bit, of course. There's a chair up there. And eventually we get to the big spot, the spot that everybody remembers and is etched into all of our minds. Mankind is right on the edge. He's teetering on the edge of the cage, and Undertaker just grabs him from behind and launches him. And like I said, I had just bought a 50-inch TV in 1998. This shit looked pretty fucking gnarly on a screen that big during this time. And I stood up. I think everybody in the room actually stood up off of our seats. We were like, what the hell did we just see? I mean, for a brief moment, I thought Undertaker broke character. He had some sort of a personal issue with Mick Foley, and he decided to kill him on worldwide pay-per-view. That actually went through my mind because I have never, I mean, still to this day, 20 years later, you look back at this bump and you're like, holy fucking shit. How is this dude alive? And the way he took the bump, the camera angles, the way Mick Foley soared through the air. This guy, it seemed like he was in the air for 10 minutes before he hit the ground. And it was countless replay after replay after replay. And, even looking back too, around the ring and stuff, this isn't like today where you have all of the space between the ring and the audience and you have this big black solid barricade. This was back in the day of the little fence, just the little black bar fence that went around the outside of the ring, and you didn't have nearly as much space. So when Mick Foley hit the table, he also hit the guardrail and it went flying back into the crowd. I mean, it was one of the craziest, it's still got to be the craziest bump ever taken in professional wrestling history. I mean, absolutely insane. Just for a guy like Mick Foley, a guy of that size too, just putting his body on the line like that. He's lucky he wasn't killed. And I thought that was the craziest thing we would ever see. I thought that was it. I mean, the match appeared to be over. They raised the cage. Terry Funk was out there. Vince McMahon was out there. Slaughter, all sorts of different officials. I think even Pat Patterson, all the WWE doctors. They wind up strapping Mick to the stretcher and wheeling him out. And we actually thought that the match was over. And I was totally fine with it because I'm like, you know what? We're going to watch that replay over and over and fucking over again. And that's all I needed. That's the craziest damn thing I've ever seen. And then, of course, as the stretcher is getting about halfway down the aisle, Mick Foley rises from the stretcher, and this is probably the most amazing part of the whole match. After Mick Foley falls like that, apparently dislocating his shoulder is what he talked about in a lot of interviews. And I think he even bruised a rib or bruised a kidney or something like that. He had some serious damage. And he's already not a very athletic guy as it is. I think even completely healthy, and uninjured, I'm surprised Mick Foley is able to climb up something like a Hell in the Cell. That's not easy to do. And it's certainly not easy to do for a guy in Mick Foley's physical condition. So I was already surprised that he was able to climb up to that thing in the beginning of the match. But for him to climb up there after taking that bump, to me, was incredible. For a guy like Mick Foley. I mean, Ricochet could do it, guys like Neville could do it, guys like that could do it with no problem after a bump like that, but Mick Foley, that's a completely different story. So, to me, I think Mick Foley deserves a lot of credit for being able to have that much adrenaline pumping through his body that he's ignoring all the pain that he's in, and he's able to climb a 20-foot fucking fence. So he finally makes it to the top and he kind of rolls up there, and then they do the second big spot. This is the one that Mick Foley says actually hurt worse than the table bump. I am almost 100% certain that this spot was planned. Just the way the Undertaker threw Mick Foley back into the choke slam. It wasn't really a choke slam. All he did was grab Mick Foley by the throat and push him backwards. They had to have known that that spot on the cage was gimmicked to give way when somebody fell on it. So, I don't know why they would even need to really lie about that, but as a fan, as an observer, it's pretty obvious. Wouldn't you guys agree? That spot was planned, no matter what they say. But it doesn't take away from the brutality of it, planned or not, because Jesus Christ, Mick Foley goes right through it like a hot knife through butter, hits the canvas with this thud, and to make matters worse, the chair is up there. So the chair comes flying down, and apparently the chair catches Mick Foley in the face on the way down, knocks out one of his teeth that actually he swallows and ends up coming through his nose. You can't make this shit up. That iconic image of Mick Foley in the corner with the tooth in his nose and blood on his mouth. I mean, what the hell? I mean, the doctors were right in there. The minute he took that bump, that little French doctor, Francois, whatever his name was, he was in there within seconds checking on Mick Foley. And by this point, he's a mess. He is just destroyed. He's probably got a concussion, separated shoulder, bruised kidney, broken ribs. Who knows what the hell's wrong with Mick Foley? But he's in a world of shit. Undertaker then comes down from the cage. He clears all the doctors and all the agents out of the ring, even choke slams Terry Funk, and Terry Funk convulses on the mat, much like Vince McMahon did when he got stunned by Stone Cold in Madison Square Garden, and starts gyrating so much that he actually shakes his own shoes off. And Jim Ross is like, well, goddamn, I think Undertaker just choke slammed Terry Funk right out of his shoes, and that's exactly what he did. So everybody gets out of the ring, and then, if I wasn't impressed enough with Mick Foley actually getting off the stretcher and climbing up to the top of the cage again, he now gets up and winds up having a match with The Undertaker that goes another 15 minutes. He even starts forming some offense. He actually starts making a comeback on The Undertaker, even opens him up. Undertaker winds up getting cut open, and Mick Foley's hitting him with the DDTs and the pile drivers and all of his other signature moves. And then he goes outside of the ring, goes underneath the ring, pulls out a bag, and this is about the point where everybody in my house lost their shit completely. After what we had just seen him do with the big fall off the cage and now the really nasty bump into the ring, the motherfucker brings out a bag of thumbtacks and just dumps them all over the ring. And I remember just seeing that bag emptying and that just shiny waterfall of thumbtacks hitting the mat. We were losing our minds. I was like, what the hell are we watching? Because back then, even though I had seen a lot of ECW pay-per-views, this was beyond anything I had ever seen before. Even the shit that ECW was doing, New Jack was diving off the top of, basketball hoops and shit, and that was still not nearly as crazy as what Foley was doing in this match. So now he's got the thumbtacks, and this was a spot that I had not seen very many times. I maybe saw one thumbtack bump in my life, and then Mick Foley takes 2 bumps on them. First, he has The Undertaker in like a sleeper, and The Undertaker just falls backwards, and then Mick Foley lands on his back and then rolls through the thumbtacks. That was kind of the only thing I didn't like about it, it was kind of a forced thumbtack bump. I think Taker should have just done the choke slam. That's all he needed to do. Unless Foley was trying to prepare his body for the pain and he wanted to take a small bump first to prepare him for the choke slam, I don't know. But right after that, he ends up getting up and you can hear him. If you turn up the volume loud enough, you can hear Mick Foley tell the referee, tell him to choke slam me. So the referee goes over to The Undertaker and tells him that. Undertaker grabs Mick Foley and choke slams him onto the tacks. My God. And I just cannot believe what Mick Foley went through that night. It's like hell. It's like being kidnapped by the mob and tortured into talking. I mean, it's just fucking crazy what Foley did to himself here. And then after all of that, the 2 big bumps, the 2 thumbtack bumps, now he's picked up in the tombstone, and Taker nails him with a tombstone. Foley is pinned on the mat, 1, 2, 3, with all of those thumbtacks sticking in himself. Taker's got him all in his arms and his legs. It was just brutal. And when the match was over, the crowd, the way they applauded that match, the way they showed those guys respect, I mean, it was quite the moment. And Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were brilliant on the call. I mean, Jim Ross has some of his most iconic calls ever in that match. As God is my witness, he is broken in half. That's what I opened up this video with. And Jerry Lawler, the same thing. So, yeah, just looking back, I'm still in shock. I mean, it doesn't get any easier to look at 20 years later.